Hi, I'm Andrew Wasson. Thanks for tuning in to my weekly guitar blog. It is January 20th, 2013, and this week we're going to discuss understanding the 1-4-5 chord progression. Now, this question was sent in by Cesar. He's from Corpus, Christi, Texas, and he wrote in with this email. I've been playing for just over a year now, and I still consider myself more or less a beginner student, plus I am really into music theory. One thing I'm slightly confused upon is the concept of what is commonly called the 1-4-5. I know that it's the steps of chords like a G, C, and D chord progression, but I'm wondering if this works in minor, and how come I'll see these as dominant seventh chords too. Thanks, Andrew. I always enjoy your YouTube lessons. From Cesar in Corpus Christi, Texas, USA. Well, hey, thanks for writing in, Cesar. You know, the 1-4-5 chord progression is without a doubt one of the most popular chord progressions for rock, pop music, folk tunes, reggae, country, blues, and many other musical styles. Plus, almost any song you can think of can be broken down and performed under a 1-4-5 set of chords. The working principle of this classic progression is very straightforward. However, there are a couple of details that you might not be aware of. So let's zoom in on the neck and run through what some of the most important concepts are when it comes to both understanding and working with the classic 1-4-5 chord progression. The classic 1-4-5 chord progressions can be performed as either major, minor, or a series of dominant seventh chords. The color generated by way of what the set of chords produces when performed is determined by the quality of the chords applied. So keep in mind that as you work with the chord changes, and I'll be describing, in a very general sense anyway, what the different emotional effects generally are. But just keep in mind as you work with the changes that the different chord qualities will produce a different emotional effect. Now let's begin with the 1-4-5 in the key of C major, with each of the chords being that of major quality. Here we go. Here's the first chord progression, key of C, 1-4-5. So the effect of using all major chords creates a pretty happy, uplifting sound that can work well for folk, even some country music, sometimes depends, but even some rock, definitely some reggae, although with the reggae sound you may want to give it that reggae beat. It's just a little bit different feel when you get into the reggae color. But next up, let's cross over to all the chords becoming minor. And we'll check out the difference in color and effect. So here is the second chord progression, all minor chords on the 1-4-5, and the key is C minor. So with the change over to minor, the progression takes on a much darker sound, and this can work well for most rock and even some pop music. Again, though, you may want to change the way that you're doing your strumming and picking and the style of your guitar's tone and so forth. However, because there really are no rules behind what qualities are supposed to be applied to specific styles, there's certainly nothing that says that you must always use a set of minors for rock and a set of majors for reggae, let's say. In the end, you'll be the best judge of what works the most appropriate for the song that you're composing. And a lot of it has to do with emotional effect. Now, next up, I'd like to mix in some dominant chords off of the most common chord step that you'd tend to see them appear upon, which would be substituting the 5 chord, in our case of the key of C, that would be taking the G major or the G minor and having it become dominant. Now, it's very popular to have that 5 chord as either a major or a minor chord in a progression, but it's also very popular to see it converted over to dominant 7th quality as well, and that functions fine whether you're in major or you're in minor. So let me give you some examples of exactly how this would sound. Here's a major 1-4-5, but where our G chord used to be major, we're going to convert it over and have it become dominant in 7th. So here we go. Here's our next progression. It's a 1-4-5 in major off the key of C major, but our 5 chord will now be G dominant 7th instead of G major. Here we go. Now next up, here's a minor 1-4-5 in the key of C minor, but the dominant 7th will be substituted again for the 5 chord. So in other words, instead of it being a G minor, we're going to convert that over to G dominant 7th. Here we go. Key of C minor, except the 5 chord, instead of it being minor, is dominant 7th now. Here we go. Now, in the case of that major progression, the G7th actually came from the extended 7th chord harmony from the key of C major. However, in the case of the minor progression, that G7th chord was actually borrowed from another form of minor harmony known as the harmonic minor scale. So the end result is basically the same in that the pull of the G7th chord is much greater when it returns back to the original root, either it being G7 to C major or G7 to C minor. The pull is simply greater when you use the dominant 7th chord. Now, the final 1-4-5 progression I want to demonstrate is one where all the chords are actually dominant 7th. So here's what this concept sounds like. Now, with all the chords performed as the dominant 7th style, you instantly get the impression of the style of blues or jazz music, and to a certain extent, even some rock as well, country and western too. And one thing's for sure, and that is that this 1-4-5 set of chord changes can be used to create a lot of different musical styles. The 1-4-5 chord changes are at the core of thousands upon thousands of songs. Whether it's a pop tune or a country ballad or a fast rock tune like Johnny Be Good or a classic blues number like Sweet Home Chicago, this chord progression is in there. And that's why it's so very important to memorize the sound of the chords moving from one to another, and to also really get to know a good deal of chord shapes around the entire guitar fingerboard as well. Because once you really have a good handle on how the 1-4-5 can sit any place along the neck, and once you have an excellent ability for all the chord fingerings that are important for performing this set of changes in any key, you'll be pretty much unstoppable at jamming out anything that comes your way when it comes to the popular 1-4-5 set of chord changes. Anyway, that's about all the time I have for today. As always, thanks for watching. Have yourself a great week, and I'll catch up with you next time. Bye for now.